Welcome to the Black Duck Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Wilkins. I'm excited to have you join me as I speak with a fascinating collection of folks, all of whom have in common that they've made a way for themselves by finding an intersection between thoughtful consideration and the tactile work of getting their hands dirty. This is an examination of intention, capability, and craft. It's where philosophy meets the blue-collar work ethic and where I find real value. Hey folks, I wanted to take a quick minute to record an introduction to this inaugural episode of the Black Duck Revival Podcast. This week my guest is going to be duck call maker Josh Raggio of Raggio Custom Calls. I've been aware of Josh for quite some time. He's well known in the duck hunting community because of the high quality and beautiful duck calls that he makes. My first personal introduction to him was earlier this spring. We were both on a turkey hunt in Kansas that was put on by Sitka Gear, and I got to spend a couple of days hanging out and hunting with Josh, getting to know him a little bit. We kind of discussed our own personal ethos, and there just seemed to be a lot of cool points of overlap there. Again, if you're not familiar with duck calls or the fanaticism surrounding them, I think this is a pretty cool introduction and primer to that. Obviously, I'm a person who spends a lot of time blowing a duck call and has spent a ton of time trying to perfect my own style of running a call. We'll use a little bit of terminology that you might not be super familiar with, but I think context will give you all the info that you need on that. What I really like about this conversation is that it's so much more than just the act of making duck calls. We talk about why Josh has chosen to live and raise his family in the same small town in Mississippi that he grew up in. We talk about familial connections, the intersection of craft and art and functionality. You know, it's a really kind of cool introduction and primer to what this podcast is really supposed to be all about, which is folks who have found a way to meld artistry and thought and craft and working with their hands into a lifestyle and a way of making a life for themselves. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. Again, this is with Josh Raggio of Raggio Custom Calls. Thanks very much. All right, I'm here in Raymond, Mississippi with Josh Raggio of Raggio Custom Calls, here in his really gorgeous duck call making shop. Thanks for having me over here, bud.
Yeah, man. Thank y'all for making the trip over.
Yeah, no, it's a fun drive. We were talking about it kind of coming on the way over here. It's very similar to our side of the Mississippi. It's just you kind of drive over that bridge, and there's a little bit of stylistic difference with, like we talked about, kudzu and palmetto, but it still feels very familiar, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been over that way a little bit. I spent a little more time in the Delta of Arkansas.
Yeah.
You know, but so obviously very different from this. But yeah, your area, much the same.
Yeah. What? So like I said, we're in Raymond, Mississippi here, man, and I know that you grew up in and around here. Your family's from here. You've chosen to run your business and have your family here. Tell me a little bit about the town, if you don't mind.
Well, it's an old town. I describe it when people ask me kind of as Mayberry.
Okay.
We got a little town square, four-way stop. Do have a little grocery store, got a few little restaurants. The bank has been here, I think, since late 1800s. It's a small town bank. And, it's just slow living compared to a lot of other places that I've been and lived. It's just it's a very genuine town. Just things move a little slower here. And, I like that. I don't like being in the hustle and bustle. Basically, if, my age group wants to be somewhere, I probably don't want to be in that area because I hate traffic. Now that I do this for, a living full time, I don't really get out much. And so I don't have to fight that traffic. But Yeah, just a really cool old town. A lot of antebellum homes here. We got some new things going. You have a new event space, have a new store. So it's really creating a buzz around our little town. And when I say that, I mean kind of around the Jackson metro area. It's becoming a more popular place to live for, the younger generations, which I think is pretty cool. But there's no more space to build. It's just a really small community. So you'd have to get out in the county now if you wanted to build a new house in Raymond. And so, it's kind of, the growth is not really possible inside the city limits, which I think is pretty cool.
How many people are in the town?
In the city, I think it's around 800, but actual Raymond, zip code is about 2,400 because it does go out into the county.
Yeah.
But we have a community college here. Hines Community College was actually one of the largest in the Southeast. We have a retirement home, golf course. So when school's in and all that, there's actually quite a few people in this little town.
Yeah, that's really neat. And it's kind of and maybe it's just because of my own personal experience, but it seems very indicative of like small southern places, that like I originally grew up in St. Louis, and just the neighborhood I grew up in had like 30,000 people, just like the little neighborhood.
Yeah.
And, I originally moved to Arkansas and went to this small college, and there were fewer people in the entire city than there were just in my neighborhood, and then I started, as I got out into the outskirts of Arkansas, you start having towns with 100, 200, 500. You go to the Arkansas Delta, like where Black Duck Revival's at, Brinkley's got 2,500 people or so. And that's pretty big for the Delta, you know? There's a lot of places that are like cotton plants, like 300 people. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't every town in Arkansas put their population on the sign?
Yeah, I think so.
That's a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
I've noticed that. I mean, it may be population.
You don't do
5.
it here?
No. Some do. I mean, every now and then you'll see a sign in Mississippi with a city and population, but it's not every single one. Like it is in Arkansas.
And the numbers will get quite small. Like
Very small.
You can get under 100 people.
I know, it's pretty cool.
But excuse me, I don't want to knock your whiskey off there. All right, so you grew up here. Your parents are still here. Your family's still here.
Yeah. My parents, and the house I grew up in is about a mile down the road. My grandmother's house was in between here and there. So yeah, man, it's just home. I went to public school here, and I just remember the community aspect of our little town, and how cool it was to grow up in that small town feel where everybody knows everybody, and your buddies live next door, right down the road, and riding bikes in town. I moved off, went to college, played baseball like we had talked about earlier, and, got my degree, met my wife, and we moved actually into another suburb of Jackson, kind of where the hustle and bustle was, and in a neighborhood. Thought it was going to be cool to grow up around other young families, this, that, and the other. I didn't even know what homeowners' dues were until then, and I didn't really like it. I didn't agree with that whole deal.
Yeah.
But I found out pretty quick that neighborhood living was not for me. So ultimately ended up, when we had our first child, wanting to come back here to, what I call home. And so we came back, and, we're here a year or two, and then I started getting into the duck call thing just as a hobby. And we this was not our first house in Raymond. Like we lived in my grandmother's house, and this became available, and we ended up here. And I could see at that point the duck call business, was growing. It was a hobby, but it was still picking up some steam. And I knew this could possibly be what I was going to do for a living one day, because number one, I loved it, and number two, I was actually having some success selling duck calls, and I really wasn't even trying to. It was never my goal to sell duck calls. I just wanted to make myself one, go hunt with it. I just thought it was kind of the ultimate accomplishment for a waterfowler. Mm-hmm. And, but I could tell I started out at our other house, just in a garage, a carport basically. So smoking hot during the summer, swatting mosquitoes, and in the winter I had a, propane heater next to me with my duck hunting clothes on, could hardly feel my fingertips. So I knew that I really needed and wanted to do something different. And my wife got me actually a duck call case to put some calls in for our anniversary or birthday or something. And the guy that made it actually lived here. And so I came down to visit him one day to ask him to build me another one.
In Raymond or in this house?
In this house.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Was this his woodworking shop?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I came down to ask him if he'd build me another one, and we were sitting basically kind of right here talking. And he said, "Hey, by the way, we're grandkids are in Texas, this, that, and the other." He said, "We're going to sell our house." And we were right in the middle of trying to figure out if we wanted to, stay in my grandmother's house and, buy it from our family, or and then I had to build a shop and, or do we need to look? And this happened to just happen. We had that conversation. I said, do not tell another person what you just told me. Let me go get my wife. Because I looked around the shop. This shop did not look anything like this when we were having that conversation. He built furniture. It was very, it was dusty and dirty, and
it's real utilitarian.
Yeah, it was what you would think of as a woodworking shop, 2 inches thick in sawdust when you walked in. But I looked around and had a vision for what it could look like with what I do, and how I wanted it to look. So sure enough, my wife came down. We looked at the house. It's it's old, built in the 50s, but cool. Just kind of has that old feel to it, and. A month later we were moving in. And so that's, I joke and I say, I've said this on some other podcasts, that we bought a shop and a house came with it.
Yeah. That's funny. That's honestly the place that we moved to about a year and a half ago was very, very much like that. Yeah. I could the house is cool and I could take it or leave it, but the shop was all, it's like a big cinder block shop that had been, skinned over with like native rock.
Yeah.
And the guy who had it before, he still had like I guess back in the 60s, it was just a phenomenal place. Like he had a hardline phone out there and he had all the numbers to the different part suppliers and stuff written on that old paneling, like an old faded marker. But we're going to get into talking about duck calls and a bunch of stuff about duck hunting. But since you've referenced this place, I think that's kind of a cool place to start because you come in here, it's beautiful. You've got that rough cut wood on the walls, lots of bits of history from your hunting career, and you see that immediately. And we've talked kind of about that you really are very intentional in how you present yourself and your work. You're coming at this from very much the perspective of an artist, and I've been struck that you've really created a very intentional space here to work with. The way you have things lit, you got candles going on and burning in like an old Jameson bottle and stuff here. You got beautiful guitars hanging around, and so I think that's really kind of a part of what you're doing. And tell me a little bit more about that, about how you decided to be so intentional with how the space was set up and how it looked and felt.
Yeah. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. The only thing, honestly, there was some intentionality behind it. However, it wasn't planned. If that probably doesn't make any sense. I guess it's just how my mind works. So I guess intentionality meant I did, the walls that aren't covered in the pallet wood, I did want to paint a certain color, obviously. I did want it to have a certain look, but it turned into, it kind of morphed and evolved. The pallet wood we got, and a buddy of mine came and, we put it on the wall. I didn't intentionally have the lighting set like this. It was just what worked for me to be able to see what I needed to see. It turns out it's just a really awesome spot to photograph. And, we've had lots of photographers come through here, and they're all just amazed at the lighting, and that was not intentional. So a lot of these things, like the mementos and some of the things that you see, hanging on the walls, one of my favorite pieces is the picture of our downtown square hanging above my lathe, because it just gives people, if you've never driven through Raymond, when pictures are taken, you can see my little hometown above that. The most intentional thing in here is this wall that everybody signs that comes. I've told this story a lot, but I went to the Gibson Guitar Factory in Memphis when it was still there and did the tour. And when you walk through the hallway of the factory, there's guitars lining the hallway, and there's all these famous artists that have signed the wall. And I thought immediately, how cool would it be, or how cool is it that those folks left their mark at the place where their instrument was made. And I thought to myself, well, I'm making instruments also, so how cool would it be for people to leave their mark in my shop when they come by? Now, I'll ask everybody that comes to sign the wall. You don't have to buy a duck call. But that was intentional, and I did it on this wood specifically in case we do ever move or have to move shops or whatever. That wall will go with me. So that wood is on top of sheetrock, and that whole thing will go with me if I ever have to leave. That's probably the most intentional part of the whole shop, and it's probably my favorite part of the whole shop, to be honest with you. I can sit here when I take a break, and I'll grab a guitar and pick on it or whatever, and I can look at those names, and I'll, when you sign it, I'll see your name, and I'll remember today, remember making the call, remember this podcast, and it'll take me back to where we first met and this, that, and the other. So I see all these names and dates, and it's just pretty cool. It's really cool for me, just to think back at all these people that have come through and left their mark on my shop.
Well, it's and man, there's so many parallels and layers of metaphors we can get into. Like we were talking about guitars, and that kind of relationship that a guitar can have with a duck call. You're dealing with something that traditionally is made out of wood and bits of metal. There's resonance. There's taking this thing that was alive, and then it's dead, and then it goes from being this living thing into kind of having life breathed back into it, and it can live on and on and on. And probably for people like you and me, one of the things that makes it even cooler is that it does endure, and that there is legacy behind that,
Yeah.
And, we're talking about like big things, family and community. And, the first thing you started talking about was the connection you have to this place and this town. And I know like we talked about, your parents live right down the road. I thought we had talked about this when we were turkey hunting in Kansas. Are y'all still running a few head of cattle?
Yeah. We've had a family farm since 1900. I went and did all the, looking in the records to see I was hoping to get the at least 1899, but we didn't. My great-great-grandparents bought the first parcel of land in 1900, and then it's been added on to since then. But yeah, been cattle farmers, chickens, horses, pigs, crops. Had kind of been there and done that with everything through the generations. Since I've been here, we've just had chickens and cows, and now we're just down to cows. So it's in my blood. It's my dad's passion. It's not what he did for a living, but he's always been a part of it. I've always been a part of it. The duck calls has pulled me away from that to a degree because this is so time demanding, but it's in my blood.
Is it a cow-calf operation or?
Yeah, beef cattle. Beef
Gotcha.
cattle. And just to know, we don't have enough to make a living with. We have enough just to be a pain in the butt sometimes.
Sure.
But look, he loves it, and it's about 30 minutes from here. So, it's an hour drive every day there and back. But yeah, my great-grandmother lived there when I was born, and so I spent every weekend down there. My grandmother was born down there. So yeah, it's very fortunate to have that in our family.
Yeah, that is really neat, man. And 1900, it's weird to think about it now, but folks that are like in high school now, they're referring to like the 90s as the late 20th century. So you're still 1900 is still quite some time ago.
But I tell you, that farm taught me work ethic. It's I wish every kid could grow up on a farm. It teaches you responsibility. It teaches you work ethic. It teaches you some mechanical skills. It teaches you, a lot of kids nowadays don't know what fencing pliers look like.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with them in my back pocket all the time.
Got a big hook hanging off the end that looked like a turkey spur, and then a bunch of places to put the wire.
Because you're always having to fix a barbed wire fence. That's just the nature of being a farmer. And so it was really good for me. My mom worked, always worked 2 or 3 jobs. Dad had his full-time job plus the farm. So,
what did your folks do for a living?
My mom was a school teacher, but she was also very crafty. She has, I guess if I have a creative bone in my body, it comes from her. So she was always doing pottery or painting or sewing, or she was always into something else from an artistic standpoint. just as a hobby. She just loved to do it. She sold everything she did. She did really well at stuff like that. But it helped pay for, a new pair of cleats for me, or whatever I needed as kids. My parents bent over backwards and worked their tails off to give it to us. So seeing them do that, and they never missed anything. They both worked all those jobs, but they never missed practice. They never missed games. So I grew up in that type of family situation.
What did your father do for a living?
He worked for the state. He was a child psychologist. He was the director of what they call the EIP program, which is early intervention. So he worked with babies that were 3 years and younger that had disabilities. So he would work with the kid and also the family, essentially preparing them for the next step of life. So very soft-hearted, gentle-hearted man is probably the best way to describe my dad.
Man, so, this is kind of starting to expose itself a little bit to me. You've got this familial history in this community, long-standing, working with your hands, this tactile understanding of a relationship with place and land and family and community, and kind of the responsibility that one has to their community. Because both of those professions you're talking about are, there's a level of selflessness, and there's something deeper than a paycheck to be involved in both of those. So I think that's actually probably a good segue into the duck call making. So we've touched on it a little bit, but you went to a few different schools on a baseball scholarship, which is, if you haven't seen Josh before, I mean, he's kind of got like a tall, wiry, he looks like a baseball player. What position did you play?
I played shortstop.
Shortstop. I'm from St. Louis, and I have obviously an affinity for baseball, and particularly that position because of Ozzie Smith.
Yeah.
But you also kind of strike me too, man. You could kind of play I feel like you could play a role as like a guy with a hand rolled cigarette and like a Western hat, like that kind of narrow hipped, just Peter Fonda type kind of deal. But
I was a professional bullfighter for a couple of years.
Man, I forgot about that. We did talk about that. Yeah, so it all makes sense.
Yeah. So I could play that role.
There you go. Have you ever seen that movie Once Upon a Time in the West?
No, I don't guess so.
Man, that's one of the best Westerns ever. It's got Charles Bronson in it, and he says like 3 words, and Henry Fonda is like the evil protagonist in it. And yeah, that's a movie worth watching, man. It's a long, like, if you just like that kind of moody spaghetti Western stuff, that's a fantastic film. But so anyway, so you did the baseball thing. You were in the corporate world working for Caterpillar for a while.
Yeah, I did that 12 years. Yeah.
And so let's actually take a step back, because we've talked about you growing up in this community and working with your hands, but what was your relationship with hunting? And particularly, I know your father was very influential on that.
Yeah, he was. He took me, I was 10 or 12 when he started taking me out waterfowl hunting. We walked the woods, squirrel hunting and stuff like that before, much younger age. But I think 10 or 12 is when he started taking me. And we couldn't afford any private land, so we hunted all public. And, I've got his journal in there from 1970 to 73, and it's really cool because he's got maps drawn of certain public land places now, and, how to get there, and, these lakes and, things that that was pre-GPS, pre-satellite, all that. So you had to go find it. And so he and his buddies would find these places, and they were, you didn't have any competition because people, they would get. Yeah. So he started taking me to some of those at a young age. So I started learning how to hunt public land, at a pretty young age. We didn't have a 4-wheeler or anything. We walked. And so you'd park your truck at the parking space, be a big gate, and there'd be a mile walk, and my 12-year-old skinny self would be in men's, smallest waders we could find, but he'd have a braided belt cinched tight as he could around my waist. The waders would be folded down, and I'd be carrying whatever I could carry. And so that's how I learned how to hunt. And, I look back at those days, and man, it's amazing I still hunt, because I about froze to death, because they didn't make kids' clothes back then.
Yeah.
But I could see how the connection to the waterfowl and the calling aspect of it, which is what he loved. And my dad was the guy that carried a duck call in his pocket every day. I mean, just eating up with duck calls.
Blew it in the truck driving around.
Anytime he could blow a duck call, he was blowing a duck call. So I listened to it all the day, all night in the house. And, pre-cell phone days, my buddies would call or whatever on the house phone, and you'd hear my dad in the background. And eventually it just was, they quit asking, so what is that? So that's just my dad blowing a duck call. So that's how I got my start. And I hunted public land for the most part, got it for a couple years in college, during a break, but pretty much I hunted public land until, 4 or 5 years ago. And, being in the business that I am, have been very fortunate to have some pretty cool invites to some private places. And, so yeah, that's how it started. And he got into competition duck calling when he was 40, when he was my age now. And so then he did that for a while. Then he directed some contest after that, the Mississippi State and Regionals. Never won anything. Came in second, I think 5 times in the Mississippi State. So he had never actually blew in the Worlds, but he's very respected in the duck call competition, world, from the guys that are old enough to know him. He's been out of it a while now, but did a lot of stuff with kids and juniors back then, trying to get them involved, helping them, kind of mentoring. So yeah, that's kind of how, and of course I came up doing the same thing that he was doing. So that's how, when I was introduced to duck calls, duck hunting, competition duck calls, and then eventually, started making my own.
Yeah. So, let's talk about that. How did that come into play? You said you kind of started as a hobby, just want to make something that you could, and I totally understand that you want to make something with your own 2 hands and take it out there and have it convince the birds and kind of complete the cycle. So yeah. How did that start initially?
That started in 2009 or 10. A friend of mine called me. He had just started making some calls. He got a lathe and everything he needed. That was right in the middle of my competition days. And he had just called me. He said, "Hey, I made a few. Would you mind?"
Let's clarify that real quick. You're talking about you were kind of doing some duck call competition stuff yourself.
Yeah. And it was right at my peak where I was blowing a duck call for 2 or 3 hours a day, practicing, really getting after it. And so he just called me because he lived about 5 minutes down the road. He said, "Hey, will you come blow these calls and just tell me what you think about feel, sound, all that? Just come critique them for him." So I went down there and I walked through his garage and I looked over and I saw his lathe and I saw all this sawdust on the ground. And then I go inside and I see these 5 calls, and I guess I'd never seen all that. All I'd been around for the most part were CNC calls. And to see the sawdust, to see the final product, to hear it make a sound, all that, I left thinking, I'm going to do that one day. And I don't know how, I don't know when, but I'm going to make my own duck call one day. So fast forward 3 years later, that was right at the advent of Facebook, but I put out on it was 2012, I think, put out on one of the, during the forum days, put out on the forum, I was looking for a jet, a drill press, and a lathe, drill press, and bandsaw. And a guy, sure enough, lived 30 minutes down the road, had it all. It was used. He was trying to make turkey calls, but it just wasn't working out for him. So I met him, bought it all for what just the drill press would have cost brand new. So I started amassing the tooling, and a friend of mine that had made calls in the past came over, and we kind of said, "Oh, you need this," and we actually started turning wood. I'm telling you, I was so ignorant to it. The first lathe I had didn't have a variable speed dial on it, and so when I turned it on and put a piece of wood on it, chucked it up and started turning, it would actually catch because it was turning so slow. Well, I didn't know that you had to actually move the belt. You move the belt to change the speed on this lathe.
Yeah, so the lathe that I've got, that's how it's set up. Yeah.
And then then it's figured out, well, how do you loosen this thing to even move the belt? And so, I literally had just never done anything woodworking wise, never turned a lathe on.
But you had a familiarity with tools and some mechanization.
Yeah, but more from a tractor engine type deal. But
that's some transferable knowledge. I mean, you understood what it was. You understood what it was to bust your knuckles on something and keep messing with it until you got it right.
Yeah. Sure. So that's how it started, and it just became just a flat out addiction. So I'd work all day, get home, start turning calls, or making firewood at that point, really. And then got my flat jig and started trying to figure out the whole process of making a tone board. And, you know, I remember it'd be midnight and our baby would be asleep, Ann would be asleep, and I'd need to blow this call. So I would actually turn, file sand, go in the truck, blow the call. I'd go get in my truck at night just so I wouldn't wake everybody up.
Yeah.
Go back out, file some more, sand some more, go back in the truck, blow the duck call. And I just loved it. I was just enamored and fascinated and determined to come up with my own tone board. I did know enough and had talked to enough old call makers that I knew that's how I needed to do it if I ever wanted to be respected by the Butches, the Rick Dunns, the Greg Hoods, those guys. I had to do it the right way, you know, from as scratch as you could start. And so I stayed at it, and, you know, it took a few months and a lot of heartburn and frustration, but finally came up with a tone board and then came up with my shape. And, you know, we were kind of just off to the races. Made myself, my dad, my best friend, some calls, and then just made some more to take to my buddies and at camp. And then the next thing I know, the garden and gun thing happened. A guy got a hold, Seth Fields got a hold of one of my calls and placed in the top 5 in the world live duck with it. That was his first year of competition calling, my first year of making duck calls. So a lot of things happened in that first year that gave sound validation through some of the contest stuff. I think the aesthetic validation through the garden and gun, because that's what that was more about, was the creativity factor of what I was doing, not necessarily how good or bad the sound was. So I got validation from every aspect really that first year of making calls. And then it just blew up. It was, you had to make a Facebook page. Facebook started happening, or, you know, some of the duck call pages, you can make your own business page. And, you know, the advent of all that happened right when I was started to figure this thing out. And the next thing you know, I have a small business and didn't even mean for it to happen.
Yeah, man. It actually, in many ways, it sounds kind of analogous to Black Duck Revival and kind of what I've got going on. Just you're doing something for yourself, and then all of a sudden, it, you know, for whatever reason, it's resonating with different people. And yeah, it's kind of weird how it can go from nothing to something pretty quickly. And then you kind of have to make that decision. You know, do I want to lean into this? Is this where I'm finding my joy and my satisfaction in life out of? Is this something I can make a life on? You know, you got 2 kids you got to take care of. You got a mortgage, all that.
Yeah. I think it's the passion. You know, I think what you and I were just talking about is we didn't necessarily mean for it to happen. I think when you have to be, you know, good at something. You have to make a quality product. You have to offer a quality service, whatever it is, or people aren't going to buy it. But I think what ultimately ends up happening once you reach that point is your passion shows through. And that is essentially what people resonate with and are attracted to in some form or fashion. Is if you believe in what you're doing so much that other people see it, that is what makes a business grow, or makes a hobby turn into a business, a successful one at least. And then it turns into, you know, lifestyles and this, that, and the other. But I think it's the beginning of it is the passion that you have for something. And I think it's genuine. And if it's not genuine, people see straight through it.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that, and I mean, this is bigger than just, you know, small businesses or the like, but I think that everyone is, whether they realize it or not, you know, what they're really striving for is to live like an authentic life. You know, and an authentic life to me is one where there's internalized value in it, you know, and that you're proud of what you're doing. And like you said, you're passionate, you care about what you're doing. And, you know, I've heard this expression before, like, you know, my boss pays me just enough not to quit, so I work just hard enough not to get fired.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, I mean, that's every time you go to the gas station or Home Depot or something, like, that's who you're dealing with, you know, and it does. It just reads very differently when someone is enthusiastic and passionate about what they're talking about. You don't have to, you can give someone a little bit of a prompt and they can talk to you about it forever, and you can hear the enthusiasm in their voice. I'm kind of deciding if I want to go down that. I think I'll step away from that rabbit hole. Real quickly, because you would assume that most people that would be listening to this would have some familiarity with waterfowling or how a duck call is made. But let's give these folks a little bit of a description exactly. Like my mom, she calls it a duck caller, and, which is like old timers kind of did that too. Or like I met a guy I was hunting with last season, and I said something about tuning a duck call. And he said, "You can tune a duck call?" And I said, "Yeah, you take it apart." And he's like, "You can take a duck call apart?" And this guy had been on plenty of hunts.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of like, if you were describing a duck call to a 5-year-old that had never seen it, how would you describe it to them?
Well, I guess we start off with it's 2 parts, a barrel and an insert. The insert is essentially your sound mechanism, your tone board, which has your reed and your cork.
And we're basically talking about like a female and a male. Like the insert fits into the sleeve, or a sleeve like
into the barrel.
Yeah, it's a barrel, but yeah.
So 2 parts put together. When you present air into it, it vibrates the reed, which is what produces the sound. And it seems and looks very simple, but as we were talking about earlier, that tone board, man, there's so many things that go into creating that sound and that tone that we're looking for as call makers, and you guys are looking for as hunters. One thing affects the other. You sand here and it affects this, or you drill this deep and it affects this. And, getting back to that whole start on that flat jig, it forces you to learn all those dynamics of that tone board. And so there's some science in it. There's just flat out just a lot of knowledge that just takes hours of screwing them up enough to figure out, don't ever do that again, because that doesn't work. But then you find something that it does work. And so where it does seem like a simple instrument, there's a whole lot that goes into making those right tones come out of it. And then even as the hunter, the person using the call, there's a certain way you have to present air into it to make that reed vibrate correctly to create the right tones also. So it's kind of like a bow and arrow and a deer hunter. You got a shooter and you got the bow. You could have a perfect bow, but a bad shooter, it's not going to shoot right. You're not going to hit the target. Much the same, there is a way to blow a duck call correctly that you have to learn and master.
Man, and to me, it's an incredibly personal, kind of an incredibly personal process. And I guess by that I mean that, like in many people that have learned to blow a duck call, or I'd say probably there's been a million people that went to a Walmart and they got that Buck Gardner CD, and that poly call, and there's that 3 blind mice, and just kind of learning that cadence. Mm-hmm. And they talk about like hold it up to your mouth like you're drinking out of a Coke bottle or something. But even within that, there's so many different ways to blow a call. There's, and you start getting into the minutia of this, especially in the competition world. But talking about, some people tell you never to blow a call dirty. Like the way that I got a duck call to make the sound I wanted it to make was blowing a duck call dirty. You know what I mean? And that's just what worked for me. And then you get into the different levels of finesse and I think a lot of people don't understand that competition calling, or kind of Main Street calling, like they call it, is really more of a demonstration of what the call and the caller can do, as opposed to what a duck actually sounds like in the field. I mean, it's all based off of the same stuff, but you're taking it to an extreme level, and it's because as someone who blows a duck call, you start to understand and value those particularities in the presentation of air and hold, and the ability to make that reed vibrate at just the right cadence, mm-hmm. And tenor that you want. But anyway, back to your specific call. You've got one tone board, you've got like one basic design, and then you've got a couple different stylistic variations on that.
Yeah.
But it's actually something that I feel like I'm very much drawn to with the way that you're making your calls, is that you created a tone board. So you created a new instrument, something that was based off of lots of people made duck calls, but the one that you made was particular to you. Like you made something new that hadn't existed in the world before.
Right.
And you honed it to the point that you felt that it was everything you wanted it to be. It was representative of how you wanted a duck call to sound. And that's what you're putting out into the world, you know? And then you have the artistic ability with all these different woods to give a different personality to every call, you know? And I would really assume that the way a call looks and the way a call feels in a person's hand is influencing how that call gets used and how they're blowing it.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if you don't mind, man, speak to that a little bit. Like so, you know, we've got the mechanics of that tone board and what you've created, but the artistic aspect with everything else. And I'm talking about like the stylistic choices with burning your lines onto it with a wire or you know, how you're putting the band on. And just talk a little bit about that if you would.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that was trial and error. And, you know, I always wondered why people pinned bands on and didn't just glue them. Well, it didn't take long to figure out after you have a few fall off or, you know, heck, even when I first started, the first call I ever made, I have to glue the band on every year because I didn't even know wood shrink. You know, I didn't moisture content. Like there's so much that goes into a piece of wood before you could even put it on a lathe. But that was a lot of evolution of, you know, just drawing up different shapes and you know, coming up with different ideas that maybe you haven't seen before. And I found it easier in the beginning than I do now, to be quite honest with you. It's weird how I'll go through dry spells with with no new creative ideas. And I hate those time periods, and I don't know sometimes where to draw inspiration from, or it's just not happening. So basically I'm just going through, you know, filling the orders that I have. But every now and then all of a sudden you'll get 10 ideas in 1 week that nobody's ever done before, you know? And so it's been an evolutionary process for me. My actual shape was an accident. It was not supposed to look like that. It actually was more of a rounded, you know, under the band where where my taper starts. It's pointed there. That was going to be more of a rounded area. And I was turning actually a piece of, synthetic material, and a big chunk of it came out. And I didn't want to waste the material. This is first few weeks I had started. And so I just turned out the chunk, and it came out into the shape that is my current shape now. So
really
didn't even mean for it to happen that way. It ended up, and then I started looking at, you know, other calls, and nobody else's call looked exactly like this. So I ran with it. It was aesthetically pleasing to me. And, you know, the only thing that I've tweaked since then really is the band size. It used to be a larger diameter band. Now it's a little smaller. So I have a little thinner call than when I first started. So, you know, things, and I don't measure anything really. So it's all feel and sight to me. So, you know, if I lined up 20 calls to you, you would say they all look basically exactly the same. I can see a difference in every single one of them. That's just how I turn and how I function. It's just feel. There's some guys that, you know, my good friend John Stevens, John will draw it out to scale on paper, and then he'll take his calipers, you know, from the lathe to the paper. That's how his mind functions, you know. So we all end up at the same end product. We just get there in different ways. So it's fun to go visit guys like that and watch and see how they do things versus how I do things. And we both kind of shake our heads at each other and say, I could never do it like that. But it works for me and it works for him. So a lot of it was just evolution, just learning and messing up enough to learn, don't do that again, but then, you know, do this or that, or this looks good or that doesn't look good. And, you know, I've got drawers full of scrap wood over there that, you know, barrels I've messed up, inserts I've messed up, and I just throw them in the drawer. If it's not right, it doesn't leave the shop.
Man, actually, let's talk about John Stevens for a second, because I know you do work with him, maybe not quite a bit, but regularly anyway. And if you don't know, John Stevens is the owner of R&T Calls, based out of Stuttgart, Arkansas. They're kind of one of the main folks in the duck call making game. John Stevens is, I think, a 3-time world champion on those Main Street competitions.
3-time world champion and champion of champions. So he is retired. He can't do it anymore.
Explain that. You can win it 3 times.
You can win it 3.
And then you're out?
Yeah. They have a champion of champions contest every 5 years, and anybody that's ever won the worlds can blow in the champion of champions. And so once you win that, you're done. You're retired. But yeah, after 3 you are, but you still have the opportunity to blow in the champion of champions.
Yeah, so that's kind of like his opus calling competition.
Yeah.
And solidly cements him in the lexicon of duck call competition blowers, and
of course.
And now R&T.
And his hand turn line is Jay Stevens.
Yeah. So he's got R&T, which originally he acquired years ago from Butch, who was a very well-known historic figure in southern duck hunting. I mean, just duck hunting in general. And then John has also started Jay Stevens Calls, which is him in his shop, very much the way you are, turning these things by hand and just putting all of his heart and soul and artistic ability and sensibility into these calls. And then you guys do a collaboration for the last several years called Skinny Hippie.
Yeah.
I guess you being the skinny one and him being the hippie.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty obvious.
So, and explain a little bit about how you guys do that. Cause I think it's super interesting that you guys are taking something that's so personal and really in many ways very intimate, and you're able to combine them and work together in that way.
Yeah, it's been fun. It started, John and I have known each other for a while, and when he got into call making, the hand turn line of things, we would see each other at various, shows or whatever. And I think the first time maybe it came up was at Reelfoot. There's a duck call show at Reelfoot every year, and I had the mobile shop there, and he walked in, checked it out, and I think I jokingly said, why don't you bring your tail in here and turn a barrel or something, just kind of messing with him. And I said, well, if you had your tools, you could do that. And he looked at me and he said, all I need are these right here. He held his hand, left and right hand up. And I said, I hear you, whatever, John. So, and then we had talked about it a few more times. Man, we got to get together at this or that, show with the mobile shop there and do some kind of collaboration. We didn't know what, but just something together. And it just never worked. I was always super busy, or he was super busy with people wanting to meet him, buy calls, talk to him, that type thing. Well, finally, I think it was last July maybe was when I called him and I said, look, I need a break. This was kind of towards the end of COVID, and I said, I've got to get out of this shop. I'm going to go crazy looking at the same walls every day for so long. I said, we've been talking about this collaboration deal. I said, I'm just going to drive up to your shop, and I'll bring wood, bring my tools, whatever we need, and let's do something. And so the night before I was leaving, I was trying, I thought, John is so well respected in the industry and what he does, and I'm trying to build my whatever to that point one day. And I thought, this thing is really cool. Like, it needs a name. This collaboration needs a name. And I came up with, he has a call he calls the Weirdo. And John and I are both kind of out there. I take it as a compliment if somebody calls me weird. That's, unique, whatever. I like that. But we both have a very different sense of different things. But he has a call that the name of the call is a Weirdo. So I was thinking, well, it's a Skinny Weirdo. That's kind of cool. And I went in and I asked my wife, I said, what do you think about that? She's like, yeah, it just doesn't quite have the ring, the catch to it. And I said, what about Skinny Hippie? And she said, well, that's actually pretty catchy. And so I texted him, and all I got back was a ha-ha. And I was like, well, dang. I was kind of let down because I thought it was a great idea. You know? So I traveled up there the next day, and we're setting up and trying to figure out what we're going to do. And I said, hey, what about that text? You don't like the name Skinny Hippie? He said, yeah, I thought it was really cool. I thought you were joking. I said, no, I wasn't joking. I think, it describes us to a T, and it sounds good together, look cool in a hat, shirt, whatever. So the first day we sat there with notepads and we sketched out 2 duck calls, and with him making the barrel on one and me making the insert, and then vice versa for the other call. I got to design one and he got to design one. and we had to make what each other, drew up. And then we sat there, and I think it was he or Blake. Blake Fisher works for R&T. We sketched out a SH, and that became the logo right off the bat. And then we started messing with boxes, and Blake was very instrumental in helping us with the graphics of a lot of that. And so we sat there and we made 2 calls, and sold them. They sold for a lot of money, and the next thing we know, we were like, wow, this was fun. That was also a learning curve, because I didn't take my lathe that first time, so it took a long time to make 2 calls, because I'd have to wait for him to get his part done, then he'd have to wait for me. And so the next time I went, I took my lathe, my tools, and it went much smoother, much faster. We drew out designs a whole lot quicker, and we did 4 that time, and then this last time we did 6. So I guess we made a total of 12 calls now under the Skinny Hippie logo and brand, and have plans to do much more. I mean, and it's amazing what they're selling for. It's we're blown away and humbled by it, that people would pay that kind of money for something that we made, just design made, but we put so much thought and effort into every call. It's neat to see what it's done and what it's turned into.
Man, and for folks that don't understand the heights that a duck call can reach as far as price, I think it's very analogous to guitars. It really is. Like, you can absolutely, and most people probably start on just like a Squire 100. I don't know what a Squire costs now. $120 probably when I bought one a long time ago. And that would be kind of like your mass-produced CNC poly calls. We're talking about polycarbonate, and material adds a lot to it, and then just the individuality of the call. And then it's like anything else, a really beautifully constructed piece of what we're talking about essentially here is functional art, by a very well-respected craftsperson will demand a higher price. And to be frank, when we're talking about these calls that are reaching $4,000 or $5,000 or $10,000, these are going to collectors. I mean, folks aren't really running these calls probably very much.
I did see one. I went and hunted with a friend of mine last year, and did not actually. Well, I did know he had it. Had no clue that he was actually going to hunt with it. But we get to the blind, and obviously it's dark. Well, it starts getting light, and I look over at his lanyard, and he's got a dadgum Skinny Hippie on his lanyard.
Really?
And I started in 2014, I started something called the Traveling Duck Call, which I made a call and I sent a journal out, and I would mail it to one person, and they would hunt with it, journal it, their hunt, and then they would mail it to a buddy. He would hunt with it, journal his hunt. Then it just kind of carried on, and there's a note at the front of the journal that says, if you end up with this thing at the end of January, please send it back to me. My address is in there, my phone number. So I've amassed over the years these journals of that duck call being circulated now around the world. It's been to obviously throughout North America, Canada, but it was also in Italy for a year.
Oh, wow.
And so I've got all these stories, and those are in Italian, and so I don't even know what they say.
Is Raggio an Italian name?
It is, but I don't speak or read Italian. So that is something that I've been doing for a long time. And last year with COVID and everything, I just carried it with me to all these camps that I went to, and I would, ask somebody to use it. And so I gave it to my buddy. So he has the Traveling Duck Call, which is really, one-off, one of a kind. People just get to hunt with it once, and a Skinny Hippie on the same lanyard. So that was a pretty cool sight for me to look at and see and reminisce about the Skinny Hippie Duck Call and making that, and then tell him and show him, look at the journal and see where all that other call had been. It's pretty neat.
Man, that's a neat idea with that Traveling Duck Call, man. And you're obviously doing some. We talked about this before we started recording. Like a lot of waterfowling and duck hunting and stuff is. I mean, this is not a cost-effective way to feed your family. Like 1900 back when your family was starting that farm. Like belly crawling up on a pond with a punt gun was an effective way to feed your family. But I mean, we're doing this for a lot of different reasons. And I've kind of waxed poetic many times about why I'm doing it, but. You're absolutely building some kind of romance into your brand and your legacy, and that's super cool. Before I forget, I know you'll be in Arkansas probably quite a bit this season. Bring that journal with you, because we've got a good friend, Marcella, man. She's from Rome, so she could read it for you.
Yeah.
And her husband is the chief of fisheries in Arkansas. So
actually, it's in there. We'll just take a picture of it. And text it to her.
We'll see. I think they actually are in Rome right now visiting. But man, so we'll kind of start winding the conversation down. But
yeah,
again, kind of talking about like the romance and the feeling behind duck hunting and calls in particular, and all this kind of legacy and familial history. And obviously, I have 2 daughters, so like I'm gonna hopefully raise daughters that want to duck hunt and have some of these sort of romantic familial connections to it. But just still probably largely duck hunting is a thing that's passed down between fathers and sons, right? Mm-hmm. And we've talked a little bit about that, a couple examples of it. And so I want to ask you to kind of relate 2 stories to kind of close this up here. One would be the story you were just telling us a couple hours ago before you started turning that call that we watched you make, about the gentleman who had, and to explain to folks also, how long of a waiting list do you have on calls right now?
It's roughly 18 to 24 months.
So if someone wants a call from Josh, they're going to put an order in, and it might be 2 years until you get that call. So just to so you understand that's what happened here. Like about a year ago or so, you said that this gentleman had requested you make a call for his son. Mm-hmm. And if you would just tell that story, because I thought it was super important. It speaks to a lot of why this stuff matters.
Yeah, I've had a lot of heartfelt moments happen through the duck call business. I've been very fortunate to experience some things that have been really cool and heartfelt. But this was one of the top stories that I have, and it happened this past week. This gentleman called last September, and he was a fellow Mississippian, and he ordered a call for his son for his birthday this year. So his birthday is actually next week, and I keep a separate stack of orders that have those specific dates. Like if it's for anniversary, birthday, or something like that, I keep a separate order form stack for those. And luckily, another guy had called this week and ordered one for next year for his son. And so I happened to grab that stack, and I realized just in a haste that call was due the next day. The one that the guy had ordered last September. And so it was about midday, and I was pretty much freaking out because what he wanted was basically one of the nicest calls that I could build. And we had all the instructions were on the order form, and I ended up getting it done. And the next morning I was, like I do with every call, take just nice pictures of it. So I'm texting him the pictures, telling him it's done, asking, I can hand deliver it, I can overnight it, seeing when exactly his son's birthday was, because typically I give myself a little bit of grace period on the due date. Well, the text wouldn't go through, and the phone, when I called him, was not active. And so I looked him up, just Googled his name. It turned out he was an attorney, and so I called his office. His assistant wasn't available, but said I'd get a call back. Well, I noticed I sent him a message on Facebook, and I noticed he was friends on Facebook with one of my best friends. And so I called my buddy, and I said, hey, this guy's ordered this call. His son's birthday's coming up in a few days. I need to get in touch with him. I think I have the wrong number. Do you have his number? And he said, man, I hate to tell you, but he passed away in this past December. So he passed away, 3 months after he placed the order for his son's duck call for his birthday this year. So I said, all right, well, this is interesting. Like, I've never had this happen. Do you have his wife's number? Do you have, I need you to help me figure this out. He said, well, he wasn't married, but here was one of his buddies. Here's his phone number. I think he'll help. So I called his friend, told him the situation, and he ended up being the executor of his estate, and so he could handle it. He knows the son. And I said, I'm just curious. I said, I saw where he was 52 when he passed away. I said, how old is his son? I didn't know if it was something that he was buying for a very young kid that wasn't hunting yet, or if it was an older. And he said, no, it'd be his 18th birthday next week. And so when he told me that, I was getting somewhat emotional, knowing that I'm about to mail this kid his birthday present from his dad, who's been gone now for 8 months. And I write a letter with every call, and so I took a lot of time to write that letter to that kid, and I have a feeling he's going to appreciate it. I have a feeling it's probably going to be very emotional for him, just because I've only told a few people this story, and everyone that I told about teared up. You know, my dad cried like a baby when I told him what had happened. And because if you put yourself in that situation, it's a cool story, but if you put yourself in that kid's situation, to be able to open up your 18th birthday present from your dad, I can't imagine how that's going to feel. I hope it's a good feeling for him, and I hope it's something that he'll treasure forever. But that was a pretty heavy one that happened this week.
You know, and for it to be a tool, you know, for it to be something that he can use and have a relationship with. You know, my dad died last year, and I have, you know, he had kind of started giving me some of his tools before he passed away, and I've got tools of his that when I'm using them, you know, it makes me think of, like, I remember being 8 years old and my dad showing me how to swing a hammer, you know, like, don't choke up on it, swing from the end so you have leverage, that kind of stuff. Or I've got a shovel that was my great uncle's. It was the man who my dad was named after. So I'm like the third generation to use this shovel. Mm-hmm. And there's something, I mean, you know, if you're talking about big heady things, you're talking about legacy. I mean, and this is beyond just that kid getting something and knowing that his dad was thinking about him, you know, but you know, this is something that he might blow this call for the next 20 years, and then he might pass it. Maybe he has a kid and on their 18th birthday, you know, this could go down generations. Yeah. And so, for you to, and I talk a lot about, with hunting, specifically with me, how it kind of involves me in this continuum, you know, and that's what's so cool in a lot of ways about these duck calls is that, I mean, I ran over a duck call one time with my truck, and I hope that never happens to any of the beautiful things you're creating. But, you know, you could have something that endured and carried on, and multiple generations could use it. And as long as they take care of it and, you know, keep both loops on from that lanyard on there so they don't drop that insert. I mean, 100 years from now, and duck hunting could look very different. Never you know? Yeah. I mean, it looks different than it did 20 years ago, you know, in our region. Yeah. Man, that's a super beautiful and impactful story. And, I can't imagine it's not going to be, you're not going to be participating in a memory that guy carries for the rest of his life.
Oh yeah. It's amazing. I do a lot of calls for kids that are sometimes not even born yet. And, you know, those letters I write to the kid, and I seal them, and I tell the dad or the mom, you know, you can't open this letter until you give the kid the duck call. And I anticipate them being 10 to 12. So they're putting these duck calls up, they're putting this letter up, and that letter will be 12 years old. And when he opens it, it's going to say, your dad, you know, ordered this call had this call made for you, you know, before you were actually even born. And so
he was thinking about you.
He was thinking about you. And, so those are some pretty cool calls that I get to make.
Yeah, man. You know, I was kind of feeling like maybe I was dead inside, and then we kept talking about it, and I just got in my feelings a little bit thinking about that. Well, man, you know, I've seen some stuff on YouTube, and we've talked about your dad too, but in particular, you were telling me about this one greenhead, this mallard mount that you have here, and that it's normally you're mounting kind of more unusual ducks, so you've got like red heads, and you got obviously I was drawn to the black duck you have over there.
There's a buffalo head in there.
Yeah, you know, and I like that too. I like kind of mounting weird ducks, especially because we come from, you know, we live in a region where like mallard is king. But man, what do you call your dad when you're talking to him?
Dad.
You just call him Dad?
Yeah. See, Dad. But my kids call him Papa. Mm-hmm. So, you know, sometimes it just is Papa. My parents are Nona and Papa to my kids. So Nona's Italian for grandmother. And but no, he's just always been Dad.
I called my father Daddy my entire life, you know, which is like it's a carryover because my grandparents, you know, his parents were from Mississippi and Arkansas, and it's kind of like a cultural thing. Like folks up north grown men don't call their fathers Daddy, but I always did. But yeah, tell me a little bit about that mountain. Why it was so special to you?
Yeah, my dad had a transplant 3 years ago, and I'm not going to get into that whole story, but basically he was on a list in New Orleans, way down the list, and would not have made it to get that transplant. And I was keeping folks involved or updated on what was going on via social media. And one day I was at a Delta waterfowl banquet, and a gentleman introduced himself to me and was basically just saying, man, I follow you and just keep up the good work, enjoy what you're doing from a duck call side of things. Well, it turned out I made a post that next day about my dad's situation and health and all that, and he saw it, and he called me and he said, "Hey, I'm sitting next to my hunting buddy who is the head of the liver transplant team at UMC in Jackson. He'd love to talk to you guys about possibly, seeing what this hospital could do here." We didn't go there. They're known for their heart transplants, but not livers. And this guy had been brought in to really start ramping the program up. Well, he was number 21 at this other hospital out of town. So we go through the same process with this hospital. It ends up they don't have much of a list. He's at the bottom of the list, but he's number 4. So,
wow, big difference.
Yeah, and it was about 2 weeks after that we got a phone call on December 31st, and it was they had gotten a liver. And so on January 1st, which is also my mom's birthday, it was the first split liver this hospital had ever done, where they gave half to my dad, half to another recipient. And now he didn't have much longer to be here. He was in bad shape. And so, it saved his life. And so essentially you can say, if I don't ever start making duck calls, that guy never comes up to me at that Delta waterfowl banquet. We never meet the guys at UMC and that transplant team, and my dad's probably not here today. Some other things could have worked out.
No, seriously, man. Making duck calls saved your dad's life.
Yeah,
that's wild.
Yeah, so that was one of our first hunts together, and that duck came in, and we shot him together, and so that's why I mounted that duck.
It's a pretty mount too, man. It's really well done.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, that's an awesome story.
Yeah.
Man, it's kind of awe-inspiring, the roads you can end up down, and
Mm-hmm.
And really think back to that, man. Like your dad had found value in hard work and trying and earning stuff. And that's how he hunted, and that's how he introduced you to hunting and to duck hunting and those mile-long walks and those waders. And that, percolated itself down 40 years later into that opportunity, that serendipity presenting itself. And, that's like some chicken and the egg type stuff all over it. The duck and the egg type stuff.
Yeah.
Man, that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, man. It's
I've had a heck of an experience over the past 8 years. Since I started turning duck calls, my life has been not any better or any worse, but I've had some really awesome experiences. Everything from stuff like the stories we just told to just some really cool and neat things that have happened just by taking that leap of faith and, quitting my corporate job and doing this, full time. It's stressful. It's super stressful. I work 7 days a week to make ends meet, but I love it. But
so why do you do it?
Because I love it. I love it. I love being my own boss. I love the creative side. It's mainly why I turn 99% of wood calls, because I see the outside of that square blank and I can't wait to see what the inside looks like and see what the final product is going to look like. I love it. I love the interaction with my customers. A lot of my customers have become some of my best friends. I don't love to travel, but I love when I get there. I love the interactions of some of the things that you and I have been on together. The different duck camps I get to do, the people that I get to meet. It's just incredible. And I forget about it sometimes because I get caught up in this shop and I don't see what's going on or hear or what's going on outside of the shop. But then I'll get somewhere and somebody give me a compliment on a picture or Instagram or just anything something in general with the business. And I think, okay, wow, things are resonating with people. And that makes me proud and feel good about what I'm doing. So I feel like I'm somehow impacting our world, or trying to, in a positive way. And that's a good feeling.
Man, you missed the one thing I was wanting you to say, and it's something you brought up when we were in Montana last month, about what you were hoping to communicate to your children with it.
Yeah, we're proponents of it's not about money, right? It's living life and doing what you want to do, what's going to make you happy. Sure, you got to have a little bit of money, and but we're proponents of doing what you love. And I had to look in the mirror one day and say, do you really love this corporate job you're doing? Or are you doing it just for the paycheck and the benefits and, everything that job had to offer? And how do you go tell your kids to follow their dreams if you don't have the guts to do it? So I really had to do a self-evaluation when it came to that. And also what I do is it's a very traditional thing that not many folks do what I do. And so trying to keep a tradition alive and show my kids, hey, you can follow your dreams and you can make a living and take care of your family. And it doesn't have to be the quote unquote 8 to 5 with, corporate type job. It can be something totally outside the box. I don't know, I know many duck call makers, but if you walked up to somebody on the street and said, hey, you know any duck call makers? They probably don't know any, So just getting outside of the norm, being unique, and finding what you're good at and what you love. It took me a long time. I mean, I didn't start till I was around 30 years old. That I didn't know that I had this ability.
Man, I think we should normalize that actually not being a long time. I think it's poppycock that you're supposed to figure out everything you're going to do with the rest of your life at 18.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds. Have you heard? What is that? There's that. We were talking about my buddy Clay Nuka, man, and he just did a podcast. We're starting a podcast series about Daniel Boone, and the guy who kind of wrote the formative Boone biography of the last 20 years has a quote in that book, and it stood out to Clay, and it stood out to me when I read it too, about that. Artists, like kind of the great propellers of society, like they come into their own in their mid-30s. Like, and you start thinking about a lot of the great and very impactful and enduring writers and visual artists. A lot of that formative and lasting work was done between like 30 and the early 40s. So yeah. Essentially, it's all down here. Hill for you from here on, man.
Well,
you're done. No, man. I love the story, man. I think it's I think there's so many resonant levels to it that, obviously I was initially drawn to it because I love waterfowl and I love hunting ducks and I love blowing a duck call. It's like I remember when I first got a duck call to do a feed call.
Yeah.
And Marianne, my wife Marianne is here. She's doing the photography for this. But
well, you're a work with your hands guy too, so you appreciate and understand that side of things.
Well, I remember calling Marianne and being like, I did it. And she was happy for me and still didn't care. But anyway, well, how would folks get a hold of you if they wanted to get a duck call in a couple of years?
Well, website is there, RaggioCustomCalls.com. I get a ton of messages through Instagram. That's at Raggio Custom Calls. There's also Facebook. Everything's Raggio Custom Calls. So pretty easy to find. All my information is there. Shoot me DMs, call me, shoot me an email, and I will respond back.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks very much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. Hey folks, thanks very much for listening to this episode of the Black Duck Revival Podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please do the things you've heard so many times before. Subscribing and a 5-star review on iTunes helps tremendously. This podcast is engineered and edited by Brian Sachs in St. Louis, Missouri, and the title track music is by Dr. Bionic out of Cincinnati, Ohio. If you'd like to keep up with Black Duck Revival or maybe even book an adventure in the Arkansas Delta, you can go to blackduckrevival.com or you can find me on Instagram at Black Duck Revival. I'd love to have you out for a hunting or a fishing trip. Thanks again. Until next time.